In 1041, two men of the king's household came into Worcester to collect the ship money. The townspeople killed them inside the church. Harthacnut sent troops and burned the county. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle puts both facts in the same short entry. It also says what they had come for. 21,099 pounds of silver. It kept 62 ships in service for 1 year. A county was burned over the upkeep of a fleet. But the Chronicle mentions no sea battle for those years. So what happened? Working backwards from that bill gets you the real cost of a long ship. And it comes down to 3 years, a good one, an ordinary one, and a bad one. What a long ship earned and what it cost swung entirely on which of the three you were having. Start with the running cost. That is the part the record handles best. The English called this tax the heergeld, which means army tax. The Chronicle gives two figures for the same year. 21,099 pounds went to the fleet. Then 11,048 pounds went to 32 ships. Divide the first by 62, and you get about 340 pounds a ship. Divide the second by 32, and you get about 345. That is two different fleets at two different sizes. The rate lands in the same place. They agree with each other. About 340 pounds to keep one ship at sea for 1 year. The Chronicle also records how the sum was worked out. It says 8 marks for every rowlock. A rowlock is the fitting that holds 1 oar. A mark is 13 shillings and 4 pence. So 8 marks comes to 5 pounds, 6 shillings, and 8 pence. That is 1 oar for 1 year. 60 oars at that rate is 320 pounds. The Chronicle's own division gave 340. The difference is about 4 more men. That is roughly a steersman and his mates. So the tax record and the shipwreck describe the same object. Skuldelev, too, is the longship in Roskilde. It was built for 60 oars and a crew of 65 to 70. The English treasury was paying for a ship of exactly that size. 65 men, 340 pounds a year. One thing about the date. Skuldelev II is 11th century, and the tax records run from 1008 to 1049. So this is the end of the Viking Age, not the start. For the famous early raids, we have ships in the ground and almost no accounts. 340 pounds. On its own, that means nothing, and I want to be clear about why I am not converting it into modern money. There is no honest exchange rate between 11th century silver and any modern currency. Silver content moved, wages moved, and most of what a household needed never passed through a market at all. Any modern figure I gave you would be invented, so the comparison has to happen inside the sources. The bishops and royal officials of London drew up an ordinance for their guild. King Æthelstan and his council approved it in the 930s. It sets each member's contribution at 30 pence or 1 ox. The two are written down as the same thing. That gives a unit. It comes from about a century before the tax figures, which is a real gap, and I am flagging it rather than hiding it. But it is English silver measured against an English animal, and that is closer than a conversion can get. One rower, paid for 1 year, cost about 42 oxen. One ship kept at sea for 1 year cost about 2,700. The bill that got 2 men killed in Worcester came to close to 870,000 oxen. That is the running cost. The ship itself is a separate problem. Its numbers come from a boat yard rather than an archive. Between 2000 and 2004, the Viking Ship Museum built a full-size version of Skuldelev II and logged every hour of work. Boat builders 10,000 hours, woodmen and their assistants 14,000. Everything together came to 26,500 hours for the hull. The hull is the wooden body of the ship before any sail goes on it. The museum gives its own estimate. With more hands on the job, a Viking Age yard could have finished in about 7 months. The materials were logged too. Oak, iron, and rope by the ton, and a sail of 112 square meters. That last item is where the accounts stop behaving the way you would expect. Lise Bender Jørgensen has costed the textiles for a Viking ship. For a warship carrying 65 to 70 men, she puts it at more than 1.5 tons of wool and 50 to 60 years of labor. That figure needs its units stated because it is easy to misread. These are person years, not calendar years. One person working full-time for 50 to 60 years. Spread across a household of 5 or 6 women, it is closer to a decade. Nobody waited half a century for a sail. The sail is the smaller half of it. The museum wove a 90 square meter sail for a cargo ship it also rebuilt, and clocked the weaving at 7,850 hours. That used the wool of up to 200 sheep. Scale it up to the Longship's sail, and you are somewhere near 10,000 hours. 10,000 hours for the sail alone. The rest of it is the crew. 65 men crossing the North Sea in an open boat need sea clothes and blankets. And clothing, 65 men, is where the 50-person years actually goes. So the most expensive thing about a longship was not the ship, it was dressing the people in it. One more input, this one turns the ship into a recurring cost. Andreas Hennius published a study of Viking Age tar pits in Sweden in the journal Antiquity in 2018. The figure he works from comes from Morten Raven and Tina Manley. It is about 500 liters of tar to build a large warship. That is on top of 18 cubic meters of wood and 1,600 hours to produce the tar itself. The large pits Hennius excavated yielded 200 to 300 liters per firing. 2 firings, 1 ship. 500 liters before the ship has sailed anywhere. Tar is not a one-off purchase. A wooden hull in saltwater has to be retreated, and so does a wool sail. What the record does not give me is how often. No source I could open names a retarring interval for an 11th century warship. So that line in the ledger stays blank, and every total after this is missing it. The accounts still need a service life. The Skuldelev ships supply one because of how they ended. They were not wrecked. Around 1070, they were loaded with stone and sunk in the channel to block the approach to Roskilde. So both ends of their working lives are dated. Skuldelev II's timber was cut near Dublin around 1042. The ship went down roughly 28 years later. A cargo ship from the same find lasted about 40 years, repaired again and again. Call it 30 seasons for a warship that gets maintained. The museum estimates a wool sail lasted 30 to 50 years, so the sail and the hull wear out at about the same rate. 30 seasons means the hull costs about 880 hours a year. Every year, whether the ship goes anywhere or not. The whole business comes down to 3 years: a good year, an ordinary year, and a bad one. Good year first. The largest single payment in the record is 1,018. The Chronicle says the tribute over all England came to £72,000. That was besides £10,500 from the citizens of London, £82,500. Snut had arrived 2 years earlier with 160 ships. That division is mine, not the chronicler's. He gives the total in one entry and the fleet size in another, and nothing in the record says the money was split evenly. It is the only route to a per-ship figure, so I'm using it and labeling it. About 515 pounds a ship, or roughly 4,100 oxen. The wage bill is 340 pounds. That leaves about 175, or roughly 1,400 oxen. The biggest payday in the entire Viking Age covers 18 months of wages, 18 months of pay. That is the best year in the record. The same 880 hours of hull replacement still have to be found. So does the same share of a sail and the same tar bill I cannot price. The 175 pounds is not what the owner keeps. The ordinary year is 1,041. 340 pounds comes in. 60 rowers at 8 marks takes 320 of it straight back out. 20 pounds left, which is about 160 oxen. Those 20 pounds are not a surplus. They are the 4 extra men the earlier arithmetic already found, the steersman and his mates. So the owner clears nothing at all. And if he takes the steering oar himself, his profit for the season is his own wage. Against that sits 880 hours of hull replacement. There is also a share of a sail that has to be rewoven inside 30 years, and a tar bill I cannot price. The ledger will not convert hours into silver, and I am not going to pretend otherwise. So the payment is consumed entirely by wages. The ship earns its crew, and nothing more. The bad year is 1009. It is worth following because the English had only just paid for these ships. The year before, the Chronicle records the rule that built them. One warship from every 310 hides of land. A hide was the land counted as enough to support one household. A helmet and breastplate from every 8. The fleet gathered at Sandwich. The chronicler says there had never been so many ships in England. Then 80 of them chased a rebel down the coast. A storm caught them. They ran aground and were burned on the beach. The king went home. The rest of the fleet was abandoned. The chronicler says the work of the whole country had been thrown away for nothing. Per ship, the bad year reads like this: no income. 26,500 hours of hull written off with 30 seasons still in it. 55 person years of textiles written off with it. I am costing English ships with Danish-built hours because Skuldelev 2 is the only hull anyone has counted, so take it as an order of magnitude rather than a total. One storm and everything spent on that ship is gone. Then multiply by the 80 ships that burned. Over 2 million hours of shipbuilding, 4,400 person years of spinning and weaving. All of it on the seabed in one autumn, without an enemy fleet ever coming into view. Nobody fought them. That is the business. A good year returns 18 months of wages. An ordinary year pays the steersman and nothing else. And there is still a bill that cannot be settled in silver. A bad year takes the entire capital stock. It does not need a battle to do it. England reached the same conclusion. In 1049, Edward stopped paying 9 ships. The Chronicle says the crews left and took the ships with them. Not long after, the tax was abolished in its 39th year. No enemy fleet forced that. So who did make money at sea? Around 890, a Norwegian named Othere arrived at the court of King Alfred and gave an account of himself, which somebody wrote down. It survives inside the Old English translation of Orosius in a manuscript now in the British Library. Othere says he lived further north than any other Norwegian and that he was one of the chief men of his district. Then he itemizes, which is the useful part. 600 tame reindeer, 6 of them trained as decoys for catching wild ones. 20 cattle, 20 sheep, 20 pigs. What little plowing he did with horses. By the standards of Wessex, that is a small holding. So he explains where the money is. Most of their wealth, he says, is the tribute the Sami pay them, and he gives the rate for a man of the highest rank: furs, hides, feathers, and skin coats, and 2 ships' ropes, 60 ells long, made of whale hide or sealskin. Rope. The rigging arrived as tax. Othere brought walrus ivory to Alfred's court, and he was, by his own account, wealthy. His ship is barely described because it was the cheap part. It carried a handful of men instead of 65, and it carried no wage bill at all. The Longship was never the asset. It was the overhead on somebody else's revenue. And the only men who could carry that overhead, season after season, were the ones who could tax a kingdom to do it.